I woke up one morning to find bulldozers tearing into my backyard, and by sundown, my land was gone. My name's Daniel Grady, I'm 42 years old, and I've lived most of my life in Caldwell County, North Carolina. I work as a civil engineer, which is ironic, considering what happened. I thought I knew land, property lines, and the value of good documentation better than anyone. But in April 2022, I learned just how easily that knowledge can be buried under greed, paperwork, and concrete. Let me start with what I had. When my father passed in 2017, he left me 112 acres of mixed woodland and pasture just outside Granville, a quiet rural town off Highway 15. The land had been in our family for 3 generations. Dad used to joke that we didn't own land, we belonged to it. He made me promise never to sell it, and I intended to keep that promise. For years, I paid the property taxes, mowed the meadows, kept the fences repaired. It wasn't glamorous, but it was home. I lived in a small 2-story farmhouse on the northeast corner, about half a mile from the main county road. I'd even started restoring the old barn in 2021. It was my peaceful place, until that April morning. It was April 12, 2022, a Tuesday. I remember because I was working remotely and had a video meeting scheduled at 9 a.m. Around 8:15, I heard what sounded like thunder rolling through the woods. Then another crash. I thought maybe a storm was coming early. But the sound didn't fade, it grew louder. When I stepped outside, my coffee cup nearly slipped from my hand. Across the South Meadow, land I'd walked my whole life, there were 3 yellow cat bulldozers, a cement mixer, and a convoy of pickup trucks. Men in neon vests were pounding stakes into the ground. The field where my dad used to keep cattle was being leveled like a construction site. I ran down the path, waving my arms. Hey! Hey! What the hell are you doing? A foreman-looking guy in a white hard hat turned, clearly annoyed. Sir, you need to stand back. Active work zone. This is my property. I shouted. Who authorized this? He frowned, pulled a clipboard from under his arm, and said, You'll need to take that up with Granville Heights HOA Development Group. We're just the contractors. You might want to call Mr. Latham, he's the project lead. I didn't know any Mr. Latham. I demanded he stop, but he just shook his head. We've got county permits and survey approvals. If you have an issue, talk to your lawyer. I stormed back to my house and started calling. The county office transferred me 3 times before a clerk named Tina finally pulled up the parcel map. She said, hesitating. According to our system, that southern parcel, about 96 acres, was subdivided and transferred to Granville Heights HOA Corporation in August 2021. My stomach dropped. That's impossible. I never sold it. Well, the deed was filed. Signed and notarized. Says here the transaction went through August 12, 2021, recorded by clerk's office number 8735. I was frozen. I asked her to email me the documents, and when they came through, I could barely breathe. There it was, my father's signature, my name, and a bill of sale showing the property transferred for $2 as a legal adjustment. But the signature wasn't mine. I knew it instantly. Someone had forged the deed. By noon, the bulldozers had cleared almost 10 acres. Survey flags marked rows of future streets, Cedar Bend Lane, Foxglove Court, Maple Hollow Drive. My land was becoming a subdivision before my eyes. At 4:30 p.m., a black SUV pulled up the dirt path to my house. A man in a charcoal suit stepped out, tall, mid-50s, silver hair slicked back. He walked like he owned the world. Mr. Grady, he said, flashing a polished smile. I'm Philip Latham, president of the Granville Heights Homeowners Association Development Group. I don't care who you are, I snapped. You're trespassing on my property. He chuckled softly. I understand your confusion. The property was acquired last year, legally, I assure you. Our records show you were compensated. Compensated? I held up the printed deed. This is forged. That's not my signature. Latham didn't flinch. Then you'll have to take that up with the county recorder's office. But I wouldn't recommend interfering with construction. We're already under contract with 96 buyers. I stared at him. You're building homes on stolen land. Mr. Grady, he said, lowering his voice, if you interfere, we'll have to file a restraining order. We're too far in to stop now. He slid a card into my hand. Call our lawyers if you want to avoid making this messy. He turned and walked back to his SUV like nothing happened. That night, I barely slept. I sat at the kitchen table staring at the fake deed, replaying every word he'd said. 96 homes. Contracts. Permits. Somehow, they'd forged my signature and pushed a subdivision through every layer of bureaucracy without me knowing. By May, construction ramped up. Every week, new foundations appeared. Trucks came and went from dawn till dusk. The sound of hammers replaced the birdsong. I called the sheriff twice. Both times, they said it was a civil matter. One afternoon, I drove down to the county office in person. The clerk handed me the official subdivision plan, a glossy document with maps, zoning approvals, and permits all stamped with signatures from the Planning Commission and Environmental Review Board. Every box checked. It was like my land had never been mine. Then, on June 3, 2022, I received a letter from Latham's lawyers, Trenton and Cross, LLP. The letter stated I was impeding construction and threatened legal action for harassment and trespass. They were threatening to sue me for standing on my own soil. That was the day I realized something dark. Latham and his people didn't just have money, they had connections. No ordinary developer could slide a forged deed through that many approvals without help. I wasn't just fighting a paperwork error. I was fighting a machine. But I wasn't about to let my father's land vanish under their concrete dream. So I made a decision that night, sitting on the porch as the lights from the construction site flickered in the distance. I was going to let them build every inch. Every house. Every mailbox. I'd let them pour millions into stolen ground. And when the time came, I'd pull the rug out from under them, with the one thing they couldn't fake. The original deed. I knew from the start that Philip Latham wasn't just a businessman, he was the kind of man who made people disappear from his world with a smile. By mid-June 2022, after weeks of watching crews level my fields, I finally decided to confront him directly again. I drove to the site office in my old pickup, the one my dad had left me. The gravel crunched under the tires, and I saw rows of stakes marking future streets. The air smelled of wet concrete and pine sawdust. Latham was waiting outside the office with two other men in suits I didn't recognize. "Mr. Grady," he said, folding his arms. "I'm glad you came. We need to talk." I stepped out of the truck. "You've taken my land. 96 acres. 96 homes. You forged my signature, and now you threaten to sue me if I interfere." He smiled faintly. "Formally speaking, Mr. Grady, you're mistaken. All of our paperwork is in order. If you interfere, you'll be liable for every day of delay, every dollar lost." "Every day of delay?" I asked, my voice rising. "This is my land." Latham didn't flinch. He leaned closer, lowering his voice so only I could hear. "Let me be clear. We have investors who've poured $18.3 million into this project already. You interrupt that, and it won't just be a lawsuit. We'll go after you personally. Liens, wage garnishments, bankruptcy filings. You understand me, Mr. Grady?" I stared at him. I'd built a career designing bridges and roads, but nothing had prepared me for this kind of threat. It wasn't just money, it was intimidation. One of the other men, shorter, with slick-back black hair, spoke. "We could even file criminal complaints for trespassing. You step onto the site again without our permission, and you'll be arrested." I clenched my fists. "You're threatening to throw me in jail for walking on my own property?" Latham shrugged. "Technically, the property belongs to Granville Heights HOA. You've already interfered by asking questions, taking photos, and speaking to the media. Consider this a formal warning." "Media?" I said, raising an eyebrow. "Yes," said Latham, with a sly grin. "Some reporters have been asking questions. If this escalates, it won't be pretty, for you or your family." I swallowed hard. The subtle threat hung in the air like smoke. He wasn't bluffing. Latham had power, money, and connections stretching far beyond Caldwell County. His HOA group wasn't just building houses, they were building immunity to consequences. That night, I went home and sat in the farmhouse, staring at the ceilings my father had painted. I could feel his presence, almost like he was standing behind me, shaking his head. "Daniel, be smart," I muttered aloud. "This isn't about brute force. It's about patience. Strategy." I had to understand my enemy. And Latham was more than an enemy, he was a predator who'd spent decades learning how to manipulate law, bureaucracy, and fear. I started digging. I pulled public records, digging through HOA filings from the last 10 years. I found Granville Heights HOA Corporation was created in 2015, with Latham listed as president from the start. Under him, the HOA had never lost a property dispute. In fact, they'd won every case by default or settlement. Then I discovered the most chilling detail: Latham had a reputation for a tactic called the build and bury. He would acquire land under dubious circumstances, wait for developers and buyers to invest, and then exploit technicalities to claim the land fully as HOA property. Every move was calculated. Every law, loophole, and regulation was his weapon. By early July 2022, the construction had become a daily torment. Workers were erecting frames for houses 1 through 24, with materials already staged for homes 25 to 48. I drove past and counted foundations, keeping notes in a weathered notebook. Then, one afternoon, I saw Latham again. He was supervising a delivery of siding for Lot 12. I walked up to him and asked, "Do you ever feel guilt for what you're doing?" He turned slowly, the corners of his mouth twitching. "Guilt? Mr. Grady, in business, guilt is a luxury. I don't have it. If you're looking for morality, you'll find none here." I pressed further. "Do you realize you're destroying a family legacy?" He laughed, a sound that rattled the windows of the site office. "Legacy? That's sentimental nonsense. Land is property, property is money. You should have acted sooner. Now, you're just in the way." I felt my blood boil, but I forced myself to breathe. Anger wouldn't win this fight. Knowledge would. By mid-July, Latham's threats escalated. I received an anonymous phone call late one evening. "Stop interfering, or we'll make things very difficult for you and your family," the voice said, distorted. I hung up, heart racing. I couldn't tell if it was Latham himself or one of his hired enforcers. Either way, the message was clear: he wanted me to quit. But quitting wasn't an option. I started documenting everything: photographs, videos, notes on every encounter, dates, times, witnesses. I called my old law school friend, Eleanor Kim, now a property attorney in Raleigh. She promised to look over the deeds and filings, but even she admitted, "Daniel, this is a nightmare. You're up against someone who doesn't play by normal rules." I went back to the site one evening just to observe. The sun was setting behind the woods, casting long shadows over the half-built houses. Workers were leaving only the hum of generators and the smell of wet concrete. That's when I noticed something that made my heart stop. On the corner of what would become Maple Hollow Drive, someone had planted a sign. "Grady lands belong to Granville Heights HOA, no trespassing." I ran my hand over the wood. It was official looking, stamped and laminated. They were marking my property like it had never belonged to me. And that's when it hit me: the stakes weren't just legal or financial. This was psychological warfare. Latham wanted me to feel powerless. I left that evening with a plan forming in my mind. They might have the permits, the investors, the heavy equipment. But there was one thing they didn't have: proof that the original deed was mine. And I had that tucked away in my father's old safe. As I locked the farmhouse behind me, I whispered to myself, "They think they've won, but they're just building their own trap." And that's when my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "We know what you're planning, Daniel. Stop now, or it will get worse." I froze. My blood ran cold. Latham had eyes everywhere. But I couldn't back down, not now. Not ever. By late July 2022, I realized I was in a war I hadn't asked for, but it was my land, and I wasn't about to surrender it without a fight. Latham had money, lawyers, construction crews, and every county office seemingly in his pocket. I had me. And a burning sense of justice. The first step was admitting I couldn't do this alone. I called Eleanor Kim, my old law school friend. She picked up on the first ring, her voice steady but cautious. "Daniel," she said, "I've looked at the deeds. You're right. The signature on that 2021 transfer is forged. If we can prove that, the whole thing collapses. But it won't be easy. Latham's lawyers will bury you in motions." "I don't care," I said. "I'll survive the motions. I just want my land back. Every last acre." Eleanor agreed to represent me pro bono for now. She said, "We need documentation, witnesses, and a strategy. And Daniel, patience. This isn't going to be fast." I nodded. Patience was the one weapon I could wield better than Latham. I had time on my side, in a way he didn't. Step 1, documentation. I created a system in the barn. Every day, I drove to the site with my camera and notebook. I cataloged each foundation poured, each wall framed, each piece of equipment delivered. I even started photographing workers' license plates, the truck's VIN numbers, and survey stakes. By August 2022, I had compiled a photographic timeline that showed precisely how the construction was encroaching on land that legally belonged to me. I also revisited old family records. My father had been meticulous with maps, letters, and property transfers. I dug through decades of paperwork, scanning blueprints, survey maps, and even old receipts for fencing materials. Every piece was another thread I could weave into the argument that the land belonged to me. Step 2, allies. Next, I reached out to neighbors, many of whom had watched the construction with confusion and fear. I introduced myself and explained the situation. A handful agreed to act as witnesses. They had seen the boundaries before Latham started clearing. One neighbor, Marcy Jennings, had lived across the road for 40 years. She told me, "Daniel, I've seen you ride that meadow with your dad. I know where the property lines were. I'll testify." Another, Harold Benson, an ex-surveyor, agreed to review Latham's subdivision plans. Harold called me after hours one night, voice shaking with anger. "Daniel, he's trying to claim more than 30 acres beyond his legal limit. Those markers are off. Someone drew them wrong on purpose." It felt good to have backup. I wasn't just fighting a corporation, I had a small army of truth behind me. Step 3, Psychological Warfare. I remembered Latham's threats, lawsuits, liens, harassment. I had to make sure he knew I wasn't scared. I began leaving letters on the site office door, polite, precise, but firm. One read: "Mr. Latham, I am aware of the forged deed, the encroachments, and the legal violations. I am documenting everything. Please consider this formal notice that any further construction on land not legally owned by Granville Heights HOA will be considered trespassing and subject to legal action." It rattled him more than I expected. By late August, a security guard confronted me when I drove by the site. "Mr. Grady, you're being recorded. Stop coming here." I smiled, holding up my phone. "I've been recording you too. Every step, every word. Have a nice day." It was a small victory, but vital. Latham had underestimated me. He thought fear would make me quit. I wasn't quitting. Step 4, Legal Research. I spent hours in the Caldwell County Courthouse, poring over land transfer laws, HOA bylaws, and property dispute precedents. I discovered a loophole in North Carolina law that could be my trump card. A recorded deed, properly signed by the original owner, overrides any fraudulent transfer, regardless of subsequent investments or construction. That night, I held my father's original deed in my hands. It was yellowed, creased, and signed with the same careful script I remembered from my childhood. That deed was my ace. Latham couldn't touch it. No lawyers, no construction crew, no HOA charter. I framed a plan. Let them continue building, documenting every inch of the development. Gather irrefutable evidence that the 2021 deed was forged. Bring the original deed to court at the exact moment Latham and his investors believed the project was unstoppable. Step 5, Testing the Enemy. I decided to probe Latham's limits. I called Trenton & Cross, LLP, his law firm, under the guise of seeking clarification about zoning and construction permits. I recorded the call with Eleanor's advice, asking pointed questions about who signed the documents, who oversaw the surveys, and whether they had independent verification of ownership. They stumbled over their answers. Small lies, contradictions, half-truths. Each one became ammunition for later. I was building a dossier, layer by layer, like a general preparing for battle. Step 6, Contingency Planning. I also prepared for personal attacks, knowing Latham could escalate. I documented my family's movements, had friends check the property overnight, and installed hidden cameras at strategic points. I had a notebook with every interaction, date, and threat. If he tried to intimidate me further, I'd have proof. By September 2022, the site had reached home 60. The streets were being paved. The lights were installed. The construction seemed unstoppable. But I knew better. Every beam, every nail, every dollar spent on that project would become part of the evidence I needed to show the court the magnitude of what he had stolen. I sat on my porch one evening, watching the workers leave as the sun dipped behind the trees. I whispered to the empty fields, "Keep building. Keep thinking you've won. The house of cards you're stacking is going to collapse. And I have the match." And that's when the first real opportunity appeared, a subtle mistake by one of Latham's surveyors. One of the foundation lines extended 12 feet beyond the property line. I photographed it. It was the first crack in their armor. I knew that, soon, everything would come down to one moment in a courtroom, with the original deed in my hand, and 96 homes built on land that wasn't theirs. It was October 18, 2022, the day I had been waiting for since April, the day my fight against Latham and Granville Heights HOA would finally reach a courtroom. I woke up before dawn, nerves buzzing, stomach tight. I dressed in a crisp navy suit, my father's old pocket watch in my vest pocket, and headed toward Caldwell County Courthouse, the original deed safely tucked in a fireproof briefcase. The courthouse smelled of polished wood and old paper, the kind of smell that hits you with the weight of history. I was early. The courtroom was nearly empty, save for a bailiff, a stenographer, and a handful of clerks preparing documents. I noticed Latham stride in shortly after, flanked by Trenton & Cross, LLP attorneys, his usual confident smile in place. He didn't see me at first. Eleanor Kim was already seated beside me, a stack of folders and binders that probably weighed more than my briefcase. She looked at me and whispered, "Daniel, remember, calm, factual, patient. Let the evidence speak." I nodded, trying to steady my shaking hands. The judge entered, a tall man with kind eyes, Judge Harold Whitaker, and the room fell silent. "Case 2022, CV 8763, he began, Grady vs. Granville Heights HOA Corporation. We are here to address the property dispute over 96 acres in Caldwell County. Mr. Grady, you may present your case. I stood, took a deep breath, and pulled out the first document, the original deed signed by my father. My voice was firm, surprisingly steady. Your Honor, I said, my father left me 112 acres of land in 2017. Granville Heights HOA Corporation, under the direction of Philip Latham, submitted a deed in 2021 showing a transfer of 96 acres from me to them. That deed is forged. I have the original, which proves my ownership. I placed the deed on the judge's bench. He examined it, nodded slowly, and looked at Latham. Latham rose, his face tight. Your Honor, the HOA has purchased the property legally. There was due process, permits, approvals, and compensation for Mr. Grady. Compensation? I interrupted, holding up the copy of the 2021 deed. $2.00. Signed under forgery. This is not compensation. This is theft. The judge frowned. Mr. Latham, do you have verification of this deed's legitimacy? Latham shuffled papers but avoided my gaze. His lawyers spoke quickly, trying to argue that the investments, construction, and contracts with buyers gave the HOA a right to retain possession. But Eleanor was ready. Your Honor, she said, standing tall, even substantial investment cannot override ownership proven by a legally valid original deed. The plaintiff's ownership predates any construction, investment, or filing by the HOA. Any attempt to claim otherwise is invalid. Then came the moment I had been waiting for. Eleanor pulled out my photographic documentation, all 96 homes under construction, the survey stakes, evidence of encroachment beyond what Latham legally owned, and the records of threats and intimidation. She laid them out systematically. Every foundation, every sign, every piece of correspondence, the court could see a clear pattern. Not only is the deed forged, she concluded, but the HOA's entire project encroaches on Mr. Grady's land. They cannot claim equitable ownership under any law I am aware of. There was a pause. Latham's face had paled. I could see the confidence drain away. He whispered something to his lawyer, they huddled briefly, but there was no way to undo what was already on the record. I leaned back, listening as the judge reviewed the materials. After a long silence, he spoke. Mr. Grady, the evidence presented is compelling. The original deed predates the disputed transfer, and forensic analysis confirms the 2021 deed is fraudulent. I am hereby ruling in favor of the plaintiff. Granville Heights HOA Corporation has no legal claim over the 96 acres. All construction on Mr. Grady's property is unauthorized and must cease immediately. The court will schedule a hearing for restitution and damages. Relief crashed over me like a wave. I felt the tightness in my chest release, my hands unclenching for the first time in months. Eleanor smiled, quietly, like she had expected this outcome all along. Latham didn't speak. His usual air of invincibility had vanished, replaced by stunned disbelief. He looked around the courtroom as though expecting someone to intervene and overturn the decision, but there was no one. The law was on my side. After the ruling, I walked outside. The crisp fall air felt sweeter than ever. Across the street, I could see the partially built homes, silent now, as crews had already stopped work pending the court's order. The hum of machinery that had haunted my nights for months was gone. For the first time, the land felt like mine again. Over the next few weeks, we went through the motions of officially reclaiming the property. Latham attempted to appeal, but with the forged deed exposed and the photographic evidence irrefutable, even his connections couldn't save him. By December 2022, all construction on my land had stopped, and Latham faced investigations for fraud and forgery. Some of the investors who had poured millions into the project sued him personally, an irony I relished quietly. The emotional aftermath was intense. I had spent months in fear, anxiety, and sleepless nights. I had learned more about human greed and cunning than I ever wanted. But I had also learned about resilience, patience, and the power of evidence. Most importantly, I realized that keeping meticulous records, seeking help, and staying calm under pressure were far more valuable than brute force or anger. I stood in the middle of my property one cold December morning, surveying the fields my father had walked before me. I ran my hands over the fence posts, the old barn, and the sprawling meadow, remembering the sound of bulldozers that had once felt unstoppable. I whispered, "You thought you could take this from us. But land remembers. And so do I." The lesson was clear, even when it feels like the system is rigged against you, persistence, preparation, and knowledge can turn the tide. Latham underestimated me, and in doing so, he gave me an advantage. Today, the 96 homes remain partially built but abandoned on my land. The streets are quiet. The mailboxes sit empty. I could demolish them, or I could leave them as a testament, a reminder of what happens when greed meets the wrong person. I often tell people, owning property isn't just about having land. It's about protecting it, documenting it, and standing firm when others try to take it from you. I never want to go through something like that again, but if I do, I know one thing: I will fight. I will endure. And I will win. The sun sets behind the old barn, golden light spilling over the fields, and I finally allow myself to feel peace. The land is mine. My father's legacy is intact. And Philip Latham? He'll remember this defeat for the rest of his life. Because some things, honor, family, and the truth, are priceless.